Luke 12:22-34. This is a reassurance of heavenly perspective. Jesus tells a story to the crowd. A story about a man who wanted Jesus to redistribute the wealth between him and his brother. Jesus then tells him a parable about a rich man who gathered all his profits together in order to retire and enjoy the good life from his business success. Does that hit home with anybody? You've done so well that you've made profits and you want to enjoy life. But the rich man only heard the words of, "You fool, you fool, you fool. Tonight, your soul is required of you." He didn't have time to enjoy any of it. And now who will own what you have accumulated? But then Jesus broadens this application and says, so is everybody. It just doesn't apply to the person I was talking about, or to the rich man I was talking about. It applies to everyone who is a man who pursues treasure in his life. Every man who pursues treasure in his life and is poor towards God. They have no wealth in heaven, while they seek to accumulate wealth in this life, or the things which can't provide it. Now, beginning in verse 22, Jesus knows that the disciples, they got this ear and they're listening to what he's telling this man. And what he had told the crowd. And he knows what the disciples are thinking. He knows that they are thinking, oh, now wait a minute. Let's get this straight, Jesus. I have to live in this nasty here and now. And you're telling me to focus on the sweet by and by, this heavenly thing. But I got to work. And I got to feed my family. And I got to take care of business. Come on, Jesus, let's get practical. Life is real. Life is hard. And you're coming up with this heavenly perspective stuff. What? Be rich with God? When I have to live with my 2 feet on the ground where real people live and where there are real problems that exist. Sometimes Jesus, this God stuff, this heavenly stuff, this eternal stuff, seems a little bit like a pie in the sky. And not really related to my daily existence now. Jesus, he knew what they were thinking, didn't he? And he knows what you're thinking right now. So, he told me to preach this. And it said in verse 22 to his disciples. So now Jesus has turned from the crowd to his followers, not talking to the masses. And he told them this story. Now he wants to apply it to his followers. So what he's about to say in verse 22 and 34, he wants his people here, you and me, and those who claim him, you and me, the followers of him. And his message is very simple, and so is mine. He repeats his message over and over and over and over again. And his message, if you decide to live your earthly life with an eternal perspective, is don't worry. Don't worry. In the middle of verse 22, He says, do not worry about life. He says, verse 25, he says, and which of you, by worrying, can add an hour to his life? When you worry, I mean, you're taking time from your life. In verse 26, why do you worry about other matters? In verse 29, do not keep worrying. In verse 32, he calls on worrying cousins. He says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I know what I just told you, the disciples, and he probably just shook them up. He's probably just, this word is probably just shaking you up too. And he says, because I told you to be rich up there, and I'm telling you now, if you're rich up there, you don't have to worry about down here. The antidote to worry is a heavenly perspective. The antidote to worry is a heavenly perspective. Now, there's a lot in our world to worry about, isn't there? We worry about our finances. If you're still working, you're worrying about your career. You're worrying about your health. You're worrying about how old you are. You're worrying about the stock market if you're into that. We worry, we worry, we worry, we worry. And there is much to worry about in terms of what is happening in the world in which we live. And yet Jesus had the audacity to come on the scene and tell you and me, for this is written for his disciples. Stop it. Quit it. Don't worry, he says. So that raises a question, doesn't it? Because we're always worrying. You know, worry has become a major medical issue. And it shows up all kinds of ways. And Jesus had the audacity to say, you and me, his disciples, stop it. What is this thing called worry? Worry has to do with a monster crawling in your mind that won't let you rest. A monster in your mind that won't let you rest. How many times have you woken up at night thinking about something that was keeping you up, worrying about it? It's painful. It's preoccupation of what might be happening to you. Worry is concern gone haywire. Concern is one thing. Worry is another. Worry is concern that is controlling you. Concern, you control worry. Concern, you control. Worry controls you. It'll keep you up at night. How many of you had a bad night's sleep? Staying up worrying about something. It keeps you from resting. It keeps you stressed out. It keeps you frustrated. And yet, Jesus had the audacity to offer you and me a medication for worry that has nothing to do with the pharmacy. It has everything to do with the perspective. So today, if you would hear what God says, you should feel by the time we have concluded, a weight of rising off of you. If you are here today and are worried. Because Jesus said that a heavenly perspective is the antidote to worry. And he will give you reassurance, as he did them, of that fact. And yet, as you have already seen, Jesus says, stop it. Stop it. Don't worry. And it seems a bit kind of odd, because most of the time we are worried. We don't feel like we can control it, can you? Because whatever the thing is that we're worried about, it just won't go away. It won't disappear. So we wind up worried when we don't want to worry. So God is commanding you to do something that sometimes it doesn't feel like you cannot do, even if you want to do it. And yet he gives you and I a prescription for it. And for this monster that is crawling around in your mind called worry. So let's see how this thing works, how our eternal perspective calms your earthly concern. He says in verse 23, the reason you should not worry, the life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Quote, life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Or maybe put it another way, we worry about the wrong things. Life is more than food, and we worry whether we're going to eat. If you really want to worry about something, worry about whether you're going to be alive or get up the next morning. Because if you're dead, eating is not a relative. It's inconsequential. Am I going to have food? No, the question is, are you going to get up in the morning? Because life is more important than food. But we tend not to worry whether we're going to wake up. We worry whether we'll have money to buy that food. And he says you're worrying about the lesser things. The body is more than clothing. And if you don't have a body that's working, you can't put on that shirt or those pants. The clothing is secondary to having the body to put it on. That's alive and functioning. So if you just have to worry about the bigger things, not the lesser, he says life is greater than the food, and your body is greater than the clothes you put on. So he shifts our perspective about priorities in life, and then he says, let me help you out a little bit more, my disciples. And he says, consider the raven. We all know what a raven is. Have you ever looked into a raven? Did a study on a raven? Mother Nature comes from Father God, and when Father God created Mother Nature, he placed in Mother Nature lessons for us to live by. He says one of those lessons is the raven. Like I said, has anybody ever studied a raven? So here's a question for you. When was the last time you studied a raven to learn theology? When was the last time you studied a raven to learn theology? Oh, you probably haven't looked at a raven and said, God, what are you teaching me from this raven? I don't think I ever have. And he says, nature has been put here to teach you some very substantial lessons about not worrying. Please note he does not say, look at the birds. He says, look at the raven. He picked a certain kind of bird. So why did he pick that bird? Because the raven was an unclean bird. The Jews could not eat the raven. The raven in the Old Testament was an unclean bird. So Jesus picks a bird that you wouldn't fool with anyway, if you were Jewish, because he's speaking to his Jewish disciples. He says, consider the bird you would never consider. Consider the bird you would never consider. And he says, let me tell you about this bird. They neither sow nor reap. They don't have farms. They don't plant seeds. They don't have plants. They don't have crops. Neither do they like the rich man have a storehouse or a building. They don't have bonds. Yet God feeds them. An unclean bird. God feeds them. So wait a minute now. The raven eats because God feeds them. So how does God feed a raven? You really don't see a raven sitting on a branch with his mouth wide open saying, Lord, drop me a worm. The beauty of how God feeds them, he builds into creation that which empowers their existence. God has already put into the way of nature how nature works, the food for an unclean raven. It's built into their creation. And then he says, are you not much more valuable than this unclean bird? Are you? If I will feed the unclean bird in my creation, and you're my child and my follower, if I have valued something that I call unclean and make sure that there's plenty of worms to go around, and you are my child, do you think I have less concern for you than them? So let me repeat this again to remind you and me, because if you ever get this in your gizzards, that's in your belly, you know way down deep in your soul, if it ever settles in your gut so that it becomes a way of thinking, functioning, and operating, the lesson you learn from the raven that he's applying to his disciples, that's you and me, is that the raven understands that when it comes to eating, God is your source. So it's so hard to get this in the minds of God's children. You only have one source. You do not have many sources. You have many resources, many mechanisms that God uses. If the raven can't find a worm over here, he's going over there. Because the raven, an unclean bird, understands that God has sufficiently provided. Have we understood that God will sufficiently provide? So that there is locatable worms somewhere. The raven understands that. An unclean bird understands that. Do we? So a raven over here, when it does not find a worm, he doesn't get an ulcer. Something like what we do when we worry too much. It does not need to go to CVS to get Excedrin or EM aspirin. It doesn't get all shook up. It doesn't worry. Because the unclean bird assumes that's something that the Creator God, that it doesn't even value it like a human being has got enough worms to go around. When you and I don't understand what the raven understands, we get all shook up, don't we? We can't sleep at night. When there is no provision over here, there's no resource working over here, because we did not have the eternal perspective that understood that God is not limited by only resource you are aware of. He says, study the raven. Don't just watch them fly. Do an exposition on them. Because if you study them, you will not see them fussing or cussing or complaining or worrying. And they're not losing it. And even though you're more valuable, they understand it better. The ravens, they don't have CDs or mutual funds, but they don't worry. But they do have a source, and that source covers them, and that source covers you also. And you are not more unvaluable than they are. Which of you, by working, can add a single hour to your lifespan? He says every time you worry, you waste time. You do not add to your life. You may be contributing to shortening it just by worrying. So worry is like a rocking chair, the old rocking chair. You get it in it, it gets started, but it doesn't take you anywhere. It just goes back and forth, back and forth. And he says, study Consider, study the lilies of the field, the beautiful flowers. That's what nature that God made. They neither toil nor spin. The beautiful flowers, they never go buy cloth to make their, or they never go to a paint shop. They never be given their bright colors. But I tell you, not even Solomon, all his glory, clothed himself like one of these. He says the beauty in nature comes because of the color coating of the Creator. Magnificent colors blending into one another. And he says Solomon, all of his glory, in not afraid like that. And that is the God who is responsible for you. He says, you got this backwards. You didn't understand that I am your source. And yet the flowers which are here are gone tomorrow. They give testimony to the power of God as He provides. Having made his point, he now wants to take a moment and drive it home to you and me. And he spends the rest of this chapter to drive home a point that an eternal perspective, being rich toward God, making the eternal greater than the temporal, making the spiritual greater than the physical, position you to experience the sourcing of God at a level that will blow your mind and lift your worry. Verse 29, do not think of what you will eat or what you will drink, and do not keep worrying, for all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek. But your Father knows that you need these things. He says, don't go crazy over the physical. Go crazy over the spiritual. Go crazy over the spiritual. Because your daddy knows what your situation is. Notice he says, your Father, not their father. The Gentiles that are the unbelievers. He says all these things the unbelievers go after. They break their necks, ignoring the spiritual in order to accumulate the physical, no matter what it is, whether it is money or health or power or whatever it is, that substance that they go after. He says, no. He says, go after me, go after the Father, go after the spiritual, because your Father knows what you need. Let's get something straight. It doesn't say the Father knows what you want. It says the Father knows what you need. Your Father knows where you are. He knows the situation. He knows the source that has gone left on you. To live is worry, is to live like the heathen. He says, no, you seek. What Matthew puts it this way, he says, seek first the kingdom. Prioritize the eternal. Prioritize the spiritual. In Jeremiah 17 says, and when you do, he provides even in a drought. I love this phrase. Do not fear, little flock. A little flock is a flock of sheep. He says tenderly, do not be afraid, because I know you're scared. I know you're nervous, you little flock of sheep. There are a lot of wolves out there. We've seen these wolves. We've heard of these wolves. If I prioritize spiritual over the physical, I'm going to lose on this physical. But don't be afraid. Chill. It'll be all right. Fear not, little flock, because the sheep are scared. They want to know if I'm going to survive. If I make this decision to prioritize spiritual over the physical, if I'm rich towards God and make that more important than being rich among men. He says, if I do that, remember, this is nothing to do with how much money you have or how much money you don't have. This has everything to do with how big the bank account is up there versus the bank down here. That has to do with the eternal over the physical, the spiritual over the temporal. He says, fear not, little flock. Your Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. He's given you the kingdom. Wow. That word gladly, it just tickles him. And your resource went left on you, didn't it? And you want to know what a man's going to do and how I'm going to make it, because your resource just went out the window. But he gave you the kingdom. But if you are rich up there, and if the eternal has been prioritized and positioned on the front end and not just on the back end, he says, it is your Father's joy. It is your Father's joy to give you the kingdom. His joy. That is what the kingdom offers. That what heaven disposes to earth. If you are rich toward God, it's hard to do. It's hard to do a bank withdrawal that you haven't made a deposit in, isn't it? Everybody wants to come to church or Bible study to draw from heaven when there is nothing in their account. And heaven looks at it and says, whoops, bounce. So what are you to do? Interesting statement. At the end of verse 33 and 34. Sell your possessions and give it to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, and unfailing treasures in heaven, where no thief comes nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We've heard this how many times? Thousands. So this one is easy to be missed, isn't it? Because I know verse 33 just shook some people up, some folks up. Sell your possessions and give it to charity. Did it shake you up a little bit? In the second half, it explains the first half, and he says, do that which has eternal ties to it. So, be benefit to others. That's why Luke 6:38 says, whatever you need, do that for somebody else. Give, and it will be given back to you, because you just made a deposit in heaven. That's why God talks about him being first. First with your time, your talents. He's talking about having him first. And he says, then you position me as a priority. So this is not just about money, it's about ministry. And he says, do this first, and you have built up an account for which a withdrawal can be made. And then he gives the clincher. And he says that this is so misread. He says in verse 34, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now here's where most people misread that. They misread that the same way your heart is, your treasure will be. And that's kind of backwards. It doesn't say where your heart is, your treasure will be. It says where your treasure is, your heart will be. Translation, your heart follows the treasure. So you don't have to have a heart right now, but you get your treasure right, and your heart will bring it, and it will pick up on it. Okay, you don't have to, the enemy, you don't let the enemy switch tags on you. Some boys went into a store, and they took off all the tags on the expensive clothing, and they put them on the cheap clothes. And they took the tags off the cheap clothes and put them on the expensive clothes. So people were buying cheap clothes and paying expensive prices because somebody had switched the tags. The devil has switched the tags on you and me. And he has made cheap what was valuable. The eternal perspective made valuable He made it cheap. And so we choose the cheap just because he put a good sticker on it, a good coloring over it. God is not complaining that you have been blessed, that he's given you this, that, or the other thing. Sure, that you're more rich up there than you are down here. Are you? Have you been putting away stuff in heaven? So when down here fails, you got something up to withdraw up there because you're rich towards God and not merely seeking to be punked by Gentiles down here. You have a heavenly Father with no limitations. He's the owner of creation. And you question whether he's going to meet your need. The way Matthew put it, seek first the kingdom. Prioritize the eternal. Prioritize the spiritual. Jeremiah 17:8. And when you do, he, God, provides even in a drought.
Mm-hmm.